to know. I would say this is actually one of the most important pieces of information from a technical perspective about the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare, from a technology perspective, especially if you're an architect. And what you need to know is that about roughly 2 to 3 years ago, Microsoft came out with this idea, and what they were going to do is they wanted to create these industry accelerators for the Dynamics 365 product. The Dynamics 365 product is their competing ERP suite. It competes with Oracle, NetSuite, what's the other? Oh gosh, SAS, SAP, etc. Right? So the idea is that we've got this ERP platform that's built on top of entities. It's enterprise capable. It integrates and built on top of Azure and integrates with the enterprise. So what they've decided to do is to build some industry accelerators on that to jumpstart ISVs in the various spaces. That's how the Cloud for Healthcare was born. That was literally its birth point. So what happened was they came out with 5, and originally, I forget the first 5, but healthcare was one of them. And essentially what they did is they built a bunch of stuff on top of Dynamics. They customized Dynamics is what they did. Anybody could have done it. As a matter of fact, one of the things I want to show you here in my demo here, let me see. There's actually a GitHub repo. So if you go up to GitHub, they actually, when they created these industry accelerators, they created them as open source. So Microsoft created one for healthcare, and then what they did is they actually published it up to GitHub. Now, what happened was they did that in 2019. What happened was then COVID hit. There became great opportunities in healthcare. By the way, this is Paul Swider's opinion, not Microsoft's opinion, this next part. What happened was then there were great opportunities in healthcare. Microsoft did something very disappointing to me. They took it down from GitHub. So they're not taking it down. Let me rephrase that. They're deprecating it. So what that means, obviously, is there's not going to be any support for it after 2021. That's the open source part. The reason for that now is because they're selling licenses. So now you can buy this stuff. And so they're not going to be updating it on open source. I'm a little miffed about that. I feel like that, flies against the whole spirit of open source, right? But it is what it is. Healthcare, especially, software is all about money. Healthcare is double all about money.
Paul,
yeah.
We're not seeing your screen if you are sharing. We were, but not now.
It's not sharing my screen?
No, at least not for me. Okay, there you go. There is again. Okay.
Okay, I apologize that you didn't miss that much. Thank you for that, Diana. You didn't miss that much. You only missed my introduction slide, and then this slide that just showed the 4 clouds. And then this is the slide I'm talking about right now, the industry accelerators. And I'm talking about this healthcare piece right here. And then I jumped out to GitHub to show you what this looks like in GitHub. So you only missed 2 slides so far, and now everybody's up to speed. Thank you, Diana, very much for that. So what happened was they published this up to GitHub, but then notice they're stopping support for it, right, on November 13th, 2020. So they've already stopped support for it. You can download it. Notice though, they're not even going to let you download it after June 30th. So if you're interested in the Cloud for Healthcare, I would go grab a copy of this repo right now because Microsoft's going to take it away. Now, obviously, they've been updating the code. I'm not saying this is going to give you the latest version of the Cloud Accelerator for Healthcare, but what it will give you is a really great way to look at the underpinnings and how this thing started, right? And maybe there even is some stuff that you can build on. But more importantly, again, this is a technical lunch and learn. We want to learn how can we dig into this stuff and really figure out what Microsoft is doing and how can we customize it and bring it in for our use, right? And so I would submit, again, one of the best tips and the biggest pieces of advice that I can give you in this session is that you check out this GitHub repo. Okay, so now I want to move on. Let's go back to the PowerPoint slides. Oh, sorry, just one second. I seem to have lost my mouse here. Something's not right. There we go. Okay, so industry accelerators. I talked about the healthcare accelerator, and we looked at that in the GitHub repo. So now let's talk a little bit more about just the high level overview. What is the cloud for healthcare? I think at this point, it's evolved past that the repo that I just showed you in the Dynamics Industry Accelerator, because now what's happening is you can pay for the SKU. You actually buy the cloud for healthcare, and that's going to give you the Dynamics pieces, right? That they've customized for healthcare. But in addition to that, it's also going to, there's a requirement that you're going to need some Azure services configured and deployed, and one of those is the FHIR services, which we'll speak about in just a moment here. But the idea is that this is the pillars that we can cover with the cloud for healthcare. And so, hold on just 1 second here. Okay, so again, these are the pillars. Notice that some of this wraps around Microsoft 365 as well. And so specifically what I mean by that, here's a great diagram that sort of, I sort of view that first slide as, I actually got the previous slide from Microsoft as a little bit of a marketing slide. This dives into sort of the technical aspect or representation of the previous slide. And so you can see that, again, this is all built on top of Dynamics, the Power Platform. It does extend out to Azure using FHIR services and the bot services, et cetera. And the way this works is that at the very bottom level, of course, at the very lower level, we have Azure, but then on top of Azure, you have the data components. In this case, it's actually Dataverse. So the data platform for Dynamics and for the Microsoft Power Platform is Dataverse. And so Dataverse is, Microsoft is billing this as their enterprise, data strategy, if you will, data integration strategy. The best way to think about it, if you're an architect and you've been working in healthcare for some time, is enterprise ERP. I mean, essentially what they've done is they've extended their ERP infrastructure across the organization through Microsoft 365, through Azure. And, they've done that in general, just for Dynamics in all industries. But then, of course, they've built out on top of that. You can see up here, I put the healthcare apps, and then they have ISVs like ourselves at Real Activity. We create custom healthcare portals and custom apps on top of Azure. So that's sort of the space that we fit in. And then, of course, in-house, you can have folks extending using Power Apps. And then FHIR services is this a new standard. I'm sure the folks on the call are hopefully familiar, at least with in concept, but essentially you can think of it as a replacement for HL7. It allows cloud integration with our personal health information in a secure way. And so this is what the architecture looks like, the conceptual architecture of the cloud for healthcare. Again, completely built on top of Dataverse and Dynamics, and then extended to Azure via FHIR services. And let me be a little more clear about that. What happens is we're actually creating an instance of the Azure FHIR API. And then what we can do is we can use that FHIR API to integrate all of this stuff with our EMR, is essentially what's going to happen. So a little bit more about FHIR. What does that look like? This is an example of using FHIR with medical devices. Right, so, as you know, with HL7 and data transfers and structures, one piece of this is mobile devices. And so that we, of course, FHIR can consume streams from data sources and then aggregate that in data lake, right? There's various things that you can do at that point. And then so more on the data services as well, not only mobile devices, but also data services. Now, one of the things, excuse me, I'm recovering from a cold. One of the things you can see here at the bottom of the screen I'm sharing with you is this really cool little tutorial that you could do on FHIR services. And so again, this is in the PowerPoint slide deck, but I just want to share this with you. So if we go out and just, do a copy and paste on that URL, what you're going to find is this is going to bring you to a tutorial that you can actually do on Azure FHIR services. So what happens is in order to install and actually kick the tires on the cloud for healthcare, what you're going to do is you're going to grab yourself a license of the cloud for healthcare. But in order to deploy it, you're going to have to first deploy the fire services and the bot service. And so what's nice about this quick start tutorial is that before you do that, you can actually go through this tutorial and it will walk you through the process of going up to the Azure portal. So you can see here, this is just your home screen of the Azure portal. And then from here, you're just going to do a quick search for Azure API for Fire, or you can just search for Fire. It will find it under Fire as well. And then you'll go ahead and create the account that's required for the API service. It's pretty straightforward. You're going to go ahead and enter in your account information, and then there's some additional settings that you can set up in terms of the tenant for authentication, audience for the APIs, and then finally, once that's done, you could go ahead and register the applications, and then go ahead and configure any additional settings that you may need to. And so it's pretty straightforward. Again, all you need to do is log into your Azure portal. And then what I would do is just go ahead and type in Fire. And now you can see in Azure, I've got the Azure API for Fire. And this is where I can get started setting that up. And again, I shared the link with the tutorial. That's actually in the PowerPoint slide deck that you just looked at. Now, let me just check the chat for a moment. Yeah, so that's an anti-open source. I'm just seeing your chat comment. Absolutely, I think that's an anti-open source as well. And in all fairness, maybe they'll publish it again. I don't want to beat up on them too badly, but yes, I was very disappointed in that. So a little going on more about the cloud for healthcare and the setup. So that's what I would recommend is you actually do the tutorial on the fire services first before you go ahead and configure it. Even if it's just your dev environment, I find you're going to save yourself some time if you do that. And then once you're feeling comfortable with Fire on Azure, then what you're going to do is go ahead and take the next steps. So what's really interesting is this is pretty well documented up here. So you can see if you actually go up under industry solutions, the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare, this is the technical docs. It talks about how to actually purchase it. And then here's the setup piece, right? And so the setup piece is pretty straightforward, although see, this is where it's telling us ahead of time, look, one of the first things you're going to have to do is you're going to have to set up the Fire API. And essentially what this is going to allow is it's going to allow integration into your, in most cases, not all, but in most cases, into your EMR that will allow the integration with the cloud for healthcare. And by the way, it's interesting to note that the way that Microsoft is billing this so far, and I should say marketing this, not billing this, I use it as a pun, their messaging so far is that this is not supposed to be an EMR. So the claim from Microsoft at this point is, hey, we're not going after the EMR market. We're not trying to step on the toes of our partners, right? So partners like Epic, Cerner, GE, et cetera. They're advertising this more as an extension to your EMR. Now it's and you can imagine in the world where you're using Epic, for example, where there could be some real magic happening, right? Because if you're using Epic, then essentially, I mean, Epic's built on top of the Microsoft stack, right? So if you're using something like Epic and then you bring in the cloud for healthcare, essentially what you get is you get the capability of wrapping that dynamic infrastructure, around things like case management, for example, and virtual visits, right? And wrapping that around your existing EMR could be really powerful for some of the folks using smaller EMRs as well. And who knows with Microsoft, maybe eventually they will end up in that space, at least for the smaller, clinics and organizations. But at this time, they're billing it as an extension to your EMR. It's not something that's going to replace your EMR. But that said, and thus even more of a reason why we need Fire, right? So we go up to the Cloud Solutions Center, we go ahead, we deploy the Cloud for Healthcare, and then we go through this configuration. You can see that we have to configure teams. If we're going to use the bookings component, that's a product that's part of Microsoft 365 that allows scheduling, then we'll need to configure that. As a matter of fact, look, they actually call out Epic here. I didn't see that earlier. I just happened to mention Epic, but you can actually see that they call out EHR integration, and they're mentioning, they're actually specifically calling out Epic. And then, so they're just giving us a list of the features that we need to set up. And then of course, check licensing, integrate with Teams, set up bookings. These are the detailed steps. Okay, and then from there, what you can do is you can jump into, okay, how do we get started with patient engagement, which is essentially case management, around the patient stuff, etc. So super cool stuff. We got about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to start to wind up and just go over these links one more time so you have everything you need. Remember, a lot of this starts at Azure in terms of the Fire API. Also, we haven't talked about it quite. It's a short meetup here, but it is worth noting that if you go into, for example, where would I find information on this? Here, okay. You can see that here, for example, patient access, they're talking about portals, and they're using the Microsoft Power Apps portals as a patient portal, and they're syncing clinical data with the Azure API using Fire services. And so the reason why I'm showing you this is, again, it's just more information about the different components that you can actually configure and different things you might do with the cloud for healthcare, right? So there's the patient outreach stuff that is centered more around case management, patient service as well. And then patient access, it's more about the portal, right, and providing access. And by the way, the portal, that's what started this thought. Sorry, the portal actually integrates with the Azure bot service as well. So a lot of these COVID bots that you've been seeing over the last 12 months, a lot of these, schedule your virtual doctor visit bots that you've been seeing, those, a lot of those bots, including the majority of them running on the government sites, are Azure healthcare bots. And so that's an integration point as well that we'll see in the server. Okay, I said in the server, we'll see in the cloud once we have this stuff configured as an option. Okay, so then of course there's operational insight stuff. And so again, all these links are in the PowerPoint deck. Remember the GitHub repository as well. And remember, the birth of this started as an industry accelerator project. I think that's key, because if you go back and you look at that GitHub repo, and now you understand that it's built on top of Dynamics, that's how this all started. And then of course, there's the Azure components. And by the way that we extend Dynamics to the healthcare organization, and the way that the primary platform that we use to build and customize ancillary apps on top of this stuff is the Microsoft Power Platform. The Power Platform is essentially an extension of Dynamics, is the best way to think about it. And as a matter of fact, they've extended it across their entire cloud suite, meaning Power Platform extends out to Azure now and all of the data services. There are components of Power Platform and Dataverse that reach out into Teams and the Microsoft 365 and SharePoint space. And of course, the birthplace of the Power Platform and CDS and entities and Dataverse was in Dynamics. So of course, it all exists in Dynamics. Okay, so folks, thank you very much for hanging in there for this session. We've got links in the slide decks. I'd also want you to check out this last slide, technical slide. So this sample architecture puts it all together from a technical perspective. So what you're looking at here at the bottom, we have the data services. This can be our EMR, this can be our IoT stuff, right? All of our data stores, our data warehouse. We surface that up through the Azure API for Fire. We do that through Azure Cloud. We push that data into the common data model. That's Dataverse. It gets surfaced up through the common data service for apps. That's also called Dataverse, is the more broad term. This is a slide that's specific to Dynamics. From there, it can be pushed into an Azure Data Lake. The Azure Data Lake is Microsoft's answer to data intelligence at scale, if you will. And the way that we analyze that data is with a product called Azure Synapse Analytics. This is extremely powerful, regardless of what industry you're in. In healthcare, it's amazing. This is visualized through Power BI and surfaced up through Dynamics and through our Sales Insight and Power Apps platform. On the Microsoft 365 side of the house, this is all surfaced up through Teams, and it allows us to do stuff like case management, shared diagnoses, shared case management, virtual, all through Teams, etc. Now I am starting to sound like a salesperson. I apologize for that. And then, of course, we've got the patient portal over here, Power Apps. That's something we're extremely passionate about. We're actually building our new website and our partner portal on top of Power Apps. Power Apps portal. So we're extremely excited about that. So again, folks, please join our mailing list, help spread the word. Our mailing list URL is here. Here's the URL to our Discord server. And I can't thank you enough for being part of today's presentation. We are winding up now. My email is up on the Meetup site. If you have any questions or would like to follow up after the lunch and learn, please don't hesitate to email me. And so once again, one final thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Paul, for sharing this important topic. Yeah. Do you guys have any questions?
Yeah, Paul, this is Johan Sona speaking. I had a question. There's in your diagram there near the end, there's a common data models. Common to who exactly? Because it might be common to Microsoft, but it may not be common to others.
Yeah, and this is going to sound like a funny answer because of what I just said about open source, but actually the common data model is published as open source. So one of the things that we're told is that if we actually customize a common data model, for example, if I start adding entities that I think are important to healthcare, so, we have a product, for example, that helps track effort with providers and nurses. So if I wanted to extend the common data model with my entities to track the providers, that would become open source under the open source agreement. And so a lot of us ISVs are really careful about this, right? Because we know whatever we customize in the common data model will become open source. Now, it is CDS, so when I say open source, I mean it has to run on Dynamics, right? You're not going to be able to pull this stuff into an Oracle NetSuite. I mean, not that I know of, unless you have a tool to convert Dynamics entities or whatever. So from that perspective, it's open. It's open in the sense of open source, and it's open to any folks that are using Microsoft Dataverse. Yeah.
Right. That was the crux of the thing. Is your data models are defined by Microsoft versus NIH, the VSAT, the ARC and their middling mediocrity, or whoever you name your big institutions, or Mayo and or MITRE, whoever. So
as it should be. And I don't get me wrong. I'm not a waiver in the Microsoft flag. I diss them where it's deserving, and I stand up for them where they deserve it. And I will stand up here. Because the reality is that if you publish an open data model as open source, and you're working with the federal government, which they are, and you're working with Epic, Cerner, Mayo, right, all of them, you're going to get contributions to the data model. To your point, though, do not confuse it with FHIR. That's totally different, right? FHIR is the industry standard that Microsoft participated in with all the other vendors. FHIR is the agnostic standard, the gold standard. CDS and the common data model is Microsoft's implementation of a common data model that fits FHIR, right? So it has to work with FHIR, or none of this, it all falls apart, right? So I think that's how I would answer that. Let's not forget we have FHIR, which is industry standard stuff. And let's acknowledge that the Microsoft stuff is separate from that. But I'll even give you some credit, and I'll say, you know what, I agree with you. They need to be careful, because look at what they just did with the healthcare industry accelerator. you know, that scares people, right? You can't be pulling product off of GitHub, but then try to make us feel comfortable at the same time about publishing parts of the common data model to be shared. So that part I'll agree with you on all day long, but I would push back a little bit on the common data model. I think they've done some good work with a broad range of partners, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, those probably should be profiles in essence. If that's another way of saying that's just a profile, an additional, like a clover leaf on top of Fire, then I buy the argument. And if that's how they're positioning it, that chews better, the mouth feels a little better. You know.
Yeah, and dude, just so you know, you're not. I hear this all the time. You know, it's a big concern at the highest level. I'll put it to you this way: it's a big concern at the highest level with partners. So, you know, I speak a lot all over the world. I speak at some of these partner events. I get invited and I speak to like the top partners with Microsoft. And every time we have a conversation about CDM, this comes up, right? But the concern there, and it's not industry specific. It's not, the concerns are not about healthcare. They're not about automotive. They're not about finance. But the concern is about who owns the model, right? The concern is if I'm Ford and I'm pushing, or Tesla, and I'm pushing out stuff that I think, you know, is good for us, you know, do I have to share that with the world? Microsoft's answer is yes. They're saying anything you customize in CDS or CDM is open source at this point. And so it is, what I'm trying to tell you is that we have this conversation a lot, but it's more slightly different. It's more in that context, you know, than it is about the, you know, the point that you're making.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and I feel your pain. And by the way, thank you so much for being here. Please come back next week and ask more questions and we can talk more. That will be great.
Okay.
All right, cheers. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.